Hello there. My name is Jasom Jensai. Welcome to Star Wars Duels. This episode is Master Luke Skywalker versus the Father of Mortis. First, I'll analyze and compare their physical abilities, then I'll discuss their force abilities before finally going over their tactics. After the analysis, I'll describe what I believe would happen if these two characters were to engage in a duel. The battlefield for that scenario will be Navarro. Luke Skywalker is the son of the Chosen One. Luke had only a few weeks at most of formal Jedi training, but he was a quick learner. In Episode 6, most of Luke's power comes from his experience in the Rebellion and his natural talent. Sometime between the Battle of Jakku and the Battle of Starkiller Base, Luke was probably given more training, or maybe granted the rank of Master without training, I don't really know, but I doubt he would start training unless he actually had consent from the Force Ghost to consider him a Master. Maybe he would, that's just a theory I have, but either way, I do think he at the very least improved in his powers since then. In The Last Jedi, Luke does not show off his power in battle very much, but I will assume at the time, just before the Jedi Order fell, he was at least as powerful as he was in Episode 6, so he'll have most of the powers he had then. So in Episode 4, Luke fires his proton torpedoes more accurately than a targeting computer. While rescuing Han, Luke takes on dozens of Jabba's henchmen. In Episode 6, Luke outflies a pair of scout troopers with no speeder bike training. Luke has shown his reflexes time and time again. In addition to Luke's speed, he has surprising amounts of strength. In Episode 5, Vader duels with one hand and easily bats away Luke's powerful strikes. But in Episode 6, Luke is able to overpower Vader through his superior strength. Vader is the guy that can lift people up by the throat with his arm fully outstretched. Most people probably can't even lift 60 pounds that way because it puts so much strain on your shoulder. Another example of Luke's incredible strength and speed is his style of fishing in The Last Jedi. Luke's fishing pole probably weighs at least half a ton. And I shouldn't say fishing pole, it's a fishing spear. Even after getting the fish, though, Luke had to carry around 400 pounds of fish all the way home. Luke's speed and strength are simply incredible. But Luke has more than raw power. In Mando, Season 2, Episode 8, he fights his way through an entire platoon of Dark Troopers. Although he fights most of them one at a time, the most he fights is 10, which is still a lot. He doesn't even break a sweat. Well, I suppose he might be sweating a little bit, but it wasn't visible. It could be like in his armpits or something, but nothing on his face. And he was wearing a pretty warm robe, so imagine how much it takes him to break a sweat. That's crazy. Then again, at the time I'm analyzing him, he is much older, so maybe he has less endurance. Unfortunately, Luke is in only one fight in the sequels, which is the closest time to where I'm analyzing him. So it is difficult to gauge how much he has changed since Episode 6 and since The Mandalorian. Especially because that fight was short and it was raining, so we can't tell whether or not he was sweating or not. However, there is a lot we can learn from this fight. So I'm just going to do a quick analysis, just breakdown of the fight. So it immediately starts with Luke getting hit in the back, and that just shows a lot of toughness, because he does not appear to be weakened at all from this, and yet that's a hard thing to do. And then here, she swings, and in the time that she swings, he force pulls the rod and is able to block it. By the way, he's blocking it one-handed. Then he demonstrates her overswinging by just dodging and then eventually tapping on the shoulder. She continues to overswing, but he continues to block it one-handed, seemingly with ease. And then he just rips it out of her hand, throws it to the side, and then she pulls a lightsaber. And then, right there, he appears to be floating. And I'm not sure, if that is any combative ability, or just if he is supposed to be floating. I feel like this fight is underappreciated. The choreography is really good in my opinion, and Luke is a master swordsman and he really gets to demonstrate it in this fight. Now let's look at his opponent, the Father. The Father never fights physically. Based on his combat style, I doubt his physical combat is noteworthy compared to his force abilities. He does have three major physical feats that I'd love to analyze. The first is the power of flight. He only does this once, in the Clone Wars Season 3, Episode 16, at 16 minutes and 53 seconds, he drops out of the sky with a pair of wings before breaking up the fight between his children with a force push. His second ability is teleportation. In the Clone Wars Season 3, Episode 15, at 18 minutes and 24 seconds, the Father seemingly teleports. It's the scene where he is testing whether or not Anakin is the Chosen One by forcing him to, force tame his children. When Anakin looks away, he teleports up to the dais from the arena floor. However, he did not do this while blocking the sun's force lightning, or when the sun tried to stab him with a dagger. So I assume it takes a lot of focus to do it, so flying might be more useful mid-combat. The last power I want to go over is his Tutor Minutes, also known as Force Absorb. Most of the time, I would put Tutor Minutes in the Force Powers category because its main purpose is to block Force Lightning, which is a Force power. But the Father's Force Lightning is more than just able to block Force Lightning, it's also able to block lightsabers. So it would come to play in a physical fight, especially because the Father doesn't have his own lightsaber, so he would rely on his Tutor Minutes in order to defend himself. In a pure physical fight, I believe Luke would dominate. The Father might have the same speed and strength as Luke. He might have Tutor Minutes, which would help him defend against a lightsaber. He might be tough enough. He's got lots of abilities, but Luke is used to fighting and he's not. Luke's go-to combat strategy is his lightsaber. On the other hand, when the son brandished the dagger to kill the Father had time to teleport, he had time to fly away, he could have retaliated with a force push, he could have even thrown a punch, but he did none of those things. Instead, he threw up his hands and froze up. Luke is extremely brave. He has fought Darth Vader, he's fought Stormtroopers, he has fought a platoon of Dark Troopers. Luke is one of the best swordsmen ever. He is quick and strong, and he would certainly best the Father in a purely physical fight. But Luke is not purely a physical fighter. When he fought the 10 Dark Troopers at the end of Mando Season 2, he didn't just use his lightsaber, he destroyed 2 to 4 of them with his telekinesis. There are 2 that he force pushes out of frame, so we don't know if they were destroyed by the force push, which is why I don't have an exact number as to how many he destroyed with the force. He used the force 4 times, that's for sure. I did try counting the Dark Troopers to see if they were destroyed, but at one point in the fight we see that there are 3 left, then he kills 5 more, so I gave up on that. Anyway, the point is that Luke is good at incorporating the force into his fights. Luke demonstrates his strength with the Force by crushing the last Dark Trooper. This is the same type of robot that is blast-proof, fireproof, and tough enough to literally punch through Durasteel blast doors given enough time. And Luke makes it implode with the Force. In The Rise of Skywalker, Luke lifts up his X-Wing. Although he was a Force ghost at the time, I think it is reasonable to assume he could have lifted his X-Wing while he was still alive. In The Last Jedi, he blows up a stone hut and force pulls a metal pole, showing that the Force comes instinctively to him even after years of being cut off from the Force. Imagine how quick his Force powers would be just before the Order was destroyed, when he was still used to using them every day. Also in The Last Jedi, Luke uses Force projection. Many people point to this power and say, look how powerful Luke is, but we haven't seen anyone else use that power, so we have no reference point as to how difficult it is. Also, it really isn't that useful in a fight. It's more of a distraction technique. On the other hand, it takes way too much focus to be used on itself, so it's kind of a selfless distraction technique. It's useful in some situations, which is why they're able to use it in The Last Jedi, but most situations, especially one-on-one duels, not super useful. All this can be summed up in one simple sentence. Luke is very strong with the Force. But the Father is also extremely powerful. He was able to throw both his children a few dozen meters and through a window with one Force push. Sure, they weren't expecting it, but it still shows off his power. His children are extremely powerful, and the ability to push both of them, that's just incredible. But the Father is also really strong with Tutor Minutes. He's able to grab and hold lightsaber blades and hold off his son's lightning for a bit. As mentioned earlier, Luke doesn't use Force lightning, so it's not super relevant, but it does show that he is very strong in the Force. He also has the ability to wipe memories, which would basically be a game over for Luke if the Father can pull it off. We see this, it's in the last episode of the 3-part arc, where Anakin turned evil because he saw the future of him turning to the dark side and he tries to prevent it, and in so doing turns to the dark side. In order to stop Anakin, the Father wipes his memories away. If he were to, say, use that on Luke to make him forget that he's a Jedi, or to make him forget how to use his powers, that would be game over for him, basically. Between the two of them, I believe the Father is more powerful. We don't see many feats from him, but from what we see, his Force powers are more powerful than any Jedi, even Luke. Also, he has the Mind Wipe power, which could come in handy. Granted, it seems like a power that would be difficult to pull off, but if he does, it's game over. Now let's talk about their tactics and style. Luke is not a brilliant tactician. He's not Thrawn. He usually relies on his instincts and his power. However, he has never been in a situation that really forces him to use tactics, other than in Episode 5 when he fights Vader, but that was 30 years before, so his tactics are probably altered significantly. We may not know his tactics, but we can analyze his style. Luke is a practitioner of Form 5 of lightsaber combat. He might have some elements of Form 6 or a few others, Form 4, Form 3, those could be in there as well. But Form 5 is clearly his main style. It's very obviously the backbone of his fighting. Form 5 is focused on strength. overpowering your opponent's strikes and turning them into your own. There is a long list of pros and cons to Form 5, especially when compared to the other forms, but because the Father doesn't wield a lightsaber or really any weapon at all, he just kind of uses 2 Dominus, the only thing that are really going to be significant are the strength of the attacks and the solid stable stance, which are super important to Form 5. The strength of Luke's strikes will be a challenge for the Father to block. He can take the heat of lightsaber through 2 Dominus, but the kinetic force behind Luke's attacks could knock him off his feet. On the other hand, the slower nature of Form 5 combined with its excellent guard stances gives the Father plenty of opportunities to catch Luke's blade and disarm the Jedi because he won't be attacking quite as frequently, but all that only comes into play if Luke gets close enough. Form 5 is known for its stable but rigid stances. Unlike Form 4 or Form 7 users, Form 5 users tend to have very little agility. Luke is no exception. He can move when he needs to, but for the most part, especially when using Form 5, he stays pretty still. Because the Father will want to keep his distance, Luke will be forced to close the distance himself, which will force him to abandon his usual strategy. We don't see much of the Father's combative style, but from what we do see, he's very reactionary. He is defensive and focused on disarming and imprisoning rather than killing. Because this is a duel to the death scenario, he will be forced to abandon his usual strategy. I would expect him to start strong but lose momentum quickly if met with resistance because of his lack of actual combat experience. The Father simply just isn't a warrior. He is powerful, yes, but he does not focus his power on combat very often. As mentioned earlier, the battlefield will be Navarro. Navarro is a volcanic planet, but unlike Mustafar, most of the lava has frozen into obsidian. There are some lava rivers, but for the most part, Navarro is an obsidian desert. The wide open desert leaves the Father with lots of room to retreat, and will make it difficult for Luke to close the distance. On the other hand, there are not many loose objects to force throw, meaning the Father will have to attack Luke directly, which takes away his ability to vary his attack directions. This also applies to Luke, but he has a lightsaber to fall back on, so he can force throw his lightsaber. The hard obsidian will provide extremely stable footing, allowing both combatants to move quicker on the ground. But the Father will probably rely on his flight ability very much, so that advantage doesn't really go to him, giving a slight advantage to Luke. The lava rivers, on the other hand, will be very dangerous. This is where the Father's flight, and also his toughness a little bit, give him a very big edge. As long as Luke can stay away from the lava rivers, there will be basically no terrain advantage. It's basically just a flat, plain desert. But if he does get close to those rivers, there's a massive terrain advantage for the Father. One other thing to note about the terrain is the Father will want to keep his distance because he's the one without a lightsaber, and Luke is the expert at physical combat, so he'll want to keep his distance, he'll want to be retreating, which means he can guide the fight to wherever he wants. So if he thinks of it, he could just bring Luke right over to the lava. Technically, I would say Luke has a significant edge. While neither is a true tactician, Luke has been in far more battles, and his battles were more dangerous and more recent than the Father's. Experience is what sets their tactics apart. On the other hand, I do think the Father has a pretty significant terrain advantage, especially if they get near a lava river. Before I explain who I think would win, let me know who you think would win and why, down in the comments. Also, make sure to leave a like if you enjoyed the analysis. Now, let's begin the battle. Luke ignited his lightsaber and charged toward the Father. Everything seemed to slow down around him as he immersed himself in the Force, letting his instincts guide him. The Father lifted his hand and swiped it in front of his body as though slapping an invisible man with his palm. Luke felt the Force drive him to the side and into the ground. He gritted his teeth and resisted, but it was too much. He lost his footing and crashed onto the hard stones. Luke's form was scraped up badly, but he threw himself to his feet and sprinted towards the Father. As he ran, Luke launched his own Force push directly at the Father. The Father was caught off guard, and his tall, slender form crashed into the stones. As Luke continued to run, the Father stood up suddenly. He sparked wings and launched himself backward. Luke leapt 30 meters into the air. As he soared toward the Father, he stretched out his hand and pulled with his mouth. He felt the Father's surprise as he and his adversary were pulled together by an invisible force. Luke brought his blade in a magnificent arc across the body, attempting to finish the Father off, but the Father caught his blade with his bare hands. He collided with the Father, too stunned to react immediately. Luke dropped like a rock, bringing the Father down with him. The Father spread his wings to fly, but Luke grabbed onto his ankle and held on for dear life. Just before landing, the Father managed to kick Luke in the face with his other foot. Luke landed safely, but the Father was able to twist his ankle out of Luke's grip and gracefully landed a few meters away. Luke and the Father's eyes met. In a flash, Luke was attacked, and he rained blow after blow on the Father. But the Father blocked each strike with nothing but his bare hand, and the Father was forced backward. He seemed to be growing tired, so Luke pushed past his own fatigue, hoping to end the fight quickly. Suddenly, the Father leapt into the air and once more spread his wings. he blocked Luke's crosscut with his shin. This time, when he kicked at Luke's face, Luke easily avoided the spin. He completed his spin with an overhand saber throw. A green blur flew towards the father, but the father knocked it aside with his hand. Luke desperately jumped. He slammed into the father's stomach, propelling him into the air before dragging him to the ground by his legs. As the father struggled to get out from under him, Luke force-pulled his lightsaber to his waiting hand. Luke plunged his saber down on the father's chest, but the father threw up a hand and caught the blade. The force of the thrust knocked the father's hand into his chest, but it did not kill him. The father grabbed the lightsaber with his other hand and pushed it to the side as he shoved the energy back into Luke's lightsaber. As the beam of green energy retreated, the father launched Luke over his head with another force. Luke flew through the air, barely landing on his feet. Behind him was the rocky shore of the lava. The father flew towards him. He landed on the ground several meters away and threw his hands forward. Luke reacted instinctively. He thrust his own hand forward, matching his father's push. With the lava behind him, the stakes had never been higher. Luke focused everything he had on the Force. He closed his eyes. The power of the Force engulfed him and flowed through him. The pressure built as his power was matched by his opponent. Beads of sweat rolled down Luke's face as he concentrated on the Force. Across from him, he felt the father giving everything he had as well. In one terrible instant, the pressure between them burst. Both Luke and the father were flung back. The father slid away from the lava, and jagged stones tried to rip him apart, but he survived. Luke was not so lucky. After a legendary struggle, the father survived. He was victorious. Thank you so much for listening to my thoughts on Luke versus the Father of Mortis. I think in this scenario, the father would win, but I think Luke would be able to pull off a victory probably about 35% of the time. What are your thoughts on this matchup? How often do you think each combatant would win? Make sure to leave a comment to further the discussion, and may the Force be with you, always. So, I actually wrote an alternative ending, because I tried to write it in more of a storytelling way this time, and I was writing the story, and then I got, because it was from Luke's perspective, and I got to the point where Luke died. And then I wrote afterward as he turned into a Force ghost, and I just liked it so much I couldn't get rid of it, but at the same time it didn't really fit with the dramatic ending. Like, this part was like more of a, I don't know, because like Luke was no longer fighting, they had to have a discussion as part of it instead of just fighting, and then I had to figure out what was going on, why they were fighting, all that kind of stuff. So I just added an alternative ending here. So here it is. It's right after the Force push and they force pushed at each other and the pressure built and then exploded backwards. Luke is blasted backwards. He slammed into the lava, which felt as hard as rock. The impact killed him, and Luke found his consciousness dissolving into the Force. In that one instant, he transcended. He was no longer bound to the physical world. He was no longer bound by time. He saw all things. He was the Force. He recalled his training and let go. Luke opened his eyes. Lying in front of him was his adversary, the father. He had slid several meters back. He was unconscious but breathing. An unknowable amount of time passed. Time was no longer relevant to Luke. The father's eyes suddenly snapped open. The dark eyes stared at Luke's shimmering blue form. The father shakily rose to his feet. "Promise me something," Luke said. "Spare the boy." "I have seen his fall," the father said. "Train him in the light and he will save the galaxy," Luke remarked. "Cast him into the shadows and he will rise up to destroy you." "I will not cast him out. I will kill him," the father said sadly. "That way he cannot act on his selfishness." "If you do, what makes you better than the Sith?" Luke asked. "No, by killing him, you are acting out of fear. Confronting fear is the destiny of a Jedi. The Sith and the Jedi are not all there is, Jedi. But there is wisdom to be learned from them. We shall see." And I kind of wish I had a better ending, but I mean, I didn't really want to have Luke convince him right there in that instant, and I didn't really want to have the father kill Ben, because, I don't know, I didn't want it to happen that way, but anyways, I hope you enjoyed the alternative ending, and I hope you enjoyed the, I guess, official ending as well. That, may the Force be with you again.